I think young people coming into organizations today are much more concerned and interested in the purpose of the organization. I think that for leaders who haven't been internationally socialized, they do have this challenge quite often of judging everybody
Mm.
by the limited experience they've got of human beings. Because what we tend to do when we're angry and defensive is we close down the ability to be empathetic to the other side. Well, I think that the greatest gift that one human being can give to another is their full presence.
Mm.
So if you're a young leader and you're responsible for some people, just practice that one.
Hello, Team ET. Welcome to today's podcast. We're about to explore the world of conscious leadership and organizational change. And as you know, everything in life, in leadership particularly, seems to be accelerating out of control. Globalization, technological advancements, and unprecedented global challenges, all of which, of course, means effective leadership has never been more critical. And I'm happy to say that in our conversation today, we're likely to delve into a whole raft of different topics, but we're going to look at things such as cross-cultural complexities. We're going to talk about psychological safe workplaces. We'll talk about inclusion to some extent, I guess, as well as some nuances, some things that I had never heard of until I started doing a little bit of research, ready to speak today with our guest. And I'm going to try to pronounce one of these nuances now. I'm going to get it wrong, I know, so we'll come back and get clarification. But equine guided exponential learning?
Equine guided.
Okay. All right. We'll come back to that. But thanks, Tom. Look, I'm excited by this conversation. It's a whole minefield of topics. I'm happy to have our guest, Mr. Thom Dennis, here with me. So please help me welcome Tom to get into this discussion as we start to really uncover some of the strategies that probably not only overcome conflicts, but also help us build a level of resilience and cohesiveness within our teams. So Tom, welcome to the ET project. As you can hear, we've got a broad scope to cover. Hope we're up to it.
Wayne, thank you very much indeed. It's a delight to be with you, and thank you for speaking to me. I think probably a less civilized hour for you than it is for me.
This is my time, so thank you for that. Before we get too deep into the conversation, Tom, I guess our listeners would love to know a little bit more about the journey that you've been on. You know, you've had a really interesting career. We're going to dive into that, but what's brought you in particular to where you are at this point in your career?
Yes, it does depend a little bit on where one starts, but yeah, I tried a number of things that didn't quite work for me. I tried to be an airline pilot, and they threw me out when I scared the instructors too much. And then I was in engineering. Well, I'd been brought up as an engineer, really. My father was an engineer, and I worked in his factory on the shop floor.
Mm-hmm.
And then, after a number of years of working in different factories and stuff, I joined the Royal Marines, and that took me 17 years on a journey of adventure and experiences. But it also put me in the front of a classroom quite a lot, and I hadn't really expected that. But I ended up talking about leadership in all different guises, and so that sort of really informed me when I came out of the Corps in 1991.
Right.
at the end of the first Gulf War. And I looked for an organization that could help me do what I've been doing, which I subsequently found out had a name called coaching. Uh, but nobody had sort of called it that beforehand. And then I started on a series of undertakings, which took me through really different aspects of leadership.
Right.
And really understanding leadership from a civilian point of view as opposed to from a military point of view, although all the services, I think they would all say, are very different. So I did a master's in essentially the psychology of change, and that really informed a model that I still use today, which is working individually, one-on-one with, it tends to be executives, working with teams and developing leadership skills in teams, and then at an organizational level, helping change cultures, because cultures are really what drives an awful lot of the behavior that happens in organizations. And that really brings me up to today. I've specialized in some industries, probably more than others, in particular banking, pharmaceuticals, and energy. And that's taken me all over the world, particularly around facilitating offsites and the key team meetings, which is a fantastic practice. And I'm so glad that if for not any other reason, the pandemic is over and people are beginning to travel, and in spite of the power of Zoom and Teams and WebEx and all the rest of them, getting actually people in a room together, you can't beat it. And
Here to
so,
that.
yeah.
Fully aligned with that. Your company is called Serenity and Leadership. And by the way, I think it's a fantastic name. When you use the word serenity, does it have any special meaning for you?
Yes, I think it does. I think that things are moving so fast these days, and leaders are having to attend to so many more different pressures, and they're becoming much more stressed. And are they good at prioritizing? Where do they spend their time? It's just so hard for leaders.
Yeah.
And what they tend to forget is that there is this small voice inside. We all have it. And if you can hear it, it guides you, it leads you, it helps you make really good decisions. And you need a bit of quiet to hear it. So for me, serenity, if your leadership is coming from a place of serenity, you are the judgments you make, the decisions, and the way that you see the world is much more refined and probably much more realistic. It has all sorts of benefits. I mean, I can tell you stories of rafting down the Grand Canyon and having some of these inspirations, but fundamentally, we don't give ourselves the space to reflect. And if we do, it makes a big difference.
Oh, yes.
So let's try for that place of serenity.
No, I love it, to be honest, Tom. I mean, we're kindred coaches, and our careers overlap to some extent in different areas, not from the military side, but from different aspects, facilitation, education. And some of the things that I read while I was doing my research around what you do, I resonate with strongly, and that explanation is part of what I liked about it. You mentioned your background started, after working a little bit in factories, you went into the military, into the Marines, 17 years. I'm wondering, did the military experience shape your approach to leadership and organizational change? Now, I know you touched on that a little bit, but if you could expand on that, would be, I think, helpful. So how much did that 17-year experience really guide you when it comes to leadership and organizational change?
I think in the Marines, I met some extremely good leaders, and I met one or two rubbish ones. um, but I think from the really, really good ones, I learned a lot about leadership. I learned that really good leaders are not driven by ego at all.
Right.
They tend to be very humble human beings who don't make a big fuss of being a leader. I think sometimes the louder a leader is, the less you should trust them. So I think that's one thing. Another thing is the amount of preparation that we used to put into doing things was enormous, huge. And I remember after the Falklands conflict, a good friend of mine was the brigade major. Who, essentially, it was his plan that got everybody from the ships to shore. It's a big job. It was a super responsible one. And he said to me, you know, because we practiced this so often, we had the basis of a plan. All we then did was adapt the plan to the current circumstances. Also knowing that the moment the balloon went up, the whole plan would go to rats. But nevertheless, having that baseline and everybody knowing what their objective was, no, objective rather than task, but their objective, when everything went haywire, which of course it did, people still could carry on and lead within their sort of microcosm of the whole macro situation. And I think that's something that I've encountered in organizations quite a bit, is that people don't do that.
Right.
They don't do that depth of planning. They don't do the depth of risk management that they jolly well should be doing. And I think a real example of that today is cyber security, and how organizations go to these experts and say, oh my God, we've been hacked. And the guy always says, well, yeah, if you'd come to me last week and talked about it, I could have helped you stop this. But for so many leaders, it's like, that's an expense. I've got other things to worry about. So the whole sort of planning going into risk management, I think, is a particular aspect which I have a view on because of my time in the Marines.
Okay. And back to the name of the company, Serenity, to a large extent, right? So having that calmness, that peace of mind, and that ability to, I guess, step back from the craziness to actually put those plans in place and to think things through. Yeah. So yeah, very nice. You also you mentioned that you've done your master's in some form of change. You also have your NLP, your neuro-linguistic programming master practitioner certification. How much do your qualifications or those fields of study influence your day-to-day when you're working with clients? Do they play a large role?
Probably. And the reason I say that is because I've done loads of training in loads of different ways. And so when I go into a client, it's like I'm carrying a large toolbox. And for a particular moment, I'll bring out a particular tool. But I don't plan that in advance. Having just talked about planning, from this point of view, it's the reverse. It's like, I need to let the organization wash over me because so often when an organization says, well, that's the problem, that's what we want you to fix, it's not the problem. It's just the presenting problem. So I'm more interested in saying, yeah, and where does that problem come from? So if we're gonna put some resource and time and effort into this, let's deal with the real problem, not the one that just is sort of sticking its finger out of the water or whatever. So I think that's an important aspect, really.
Right. So getting to the root cause rather than putting the Band-Aid and treating the symptom. Yeah. Conscious leadership. I know this is one of your pet subjects. You emphasize the need for conscious leadership. What does it actually mean when we talk about conscious leadership? What do you mean by that?
Well, I think in the old days we used to train leaders with certain models in mind, and it was a very structured approach. And it doesn't work anymore. So, as I've said, when I go into an organization, I want to stay this very overused word, agile.
Yes.
But I'm trying to do a little bit of a dance to just be aware of possible inputs from wherever. And so for me, it's less using my head and it's more using my heart. It's more about feeling what's going on.
Okay.
And the point about being conscious as a leader is that sense of awareness of what's going on. It's like our bodies are extraordinary expressors, and yet most of us spend our life completely ignoring what the body is telling us. But if I'm in a particular situation, I don't profess to be really good at this. It's something that I'm always trying to develop as a skill. But what I'm trying to do is to be sensitive to the soft voices, the soft sensations, which actually are trying to inform me at a deep level of what's going on. That's conscious leadership. It's at a more simplistic level. You could say, well, I come across you in the corridor or an office, and my whole system from millennia from before sort of cuts in. So I have to assess you. I judge you. I make decisions about who you are and how you are and whether we're going to get on. Just based on, at some level, there's some good information that we're getting energetically, but some of those decisions are going to be completely wrong. And so if I'm conscious, then I'm going to challenge those things. I'm going to say, I notice he's got glasses. I don't like people with glasses. Why do I not? Because when I was 16 years old, I got filled in by a guy who had glasses. So I have this natural antipathy to people with glasses. Obviously I'm making all this up, but if I notice and say, okay, he's got glasses. I notice that I'm now bringing an old belief into this. Yes. It has no relevance in this moment. So I have to override it. But I have to do it consciously. And the thing is that we are driven by so many of these biases through our conditioning, through our lives. And it really warps the way that we react, interrelate. And of course, that's the basis of inclusion and diversity, which so many people are talking about. Most inclusion is being put down in most people because of unconscious biases and and processes going on that have no validity in the moment. So we have to challenge them. That's conscious leadership.
I love that. We could, that's the rest of the podcast. We could stay here for that. I mean, this area I really enjoy talking about as well. So I mean, to get to that conscious stage, we have to move out of where we spend most of our time in the subconscious. We have to then be intentional. You know, there's a whole dynamic that goes on with being able to become conscious. I think you also talk about self-awareness a lot, and I can see you're leaning into that topic there with your answer. I always have one question around self-awareness, and that is, and this is just my own view, I'd be interested in yours. I see self-awareness as our starting point, like step one, that we need to become more self-aware. Where I struggle, and what I talk with my clients a lot about, is the awareness is fantastic. It's a given. We must become more self-aware. But then learning to do something with the awareness is where I find a lot of people fall over. So we become extremely self-aware, and I could use myself as a case study. And then for whatever reason, we don't take the actions to modify or to change. So we don't regulate. What's your thoughts around that? I'm just curious.
Well, we run an online leadership program, and the first module is sort of titled "Know Thyself," and the second module is "Lead Thyself." And I suppose, in a sense, what you're talking about now is the lead bit.
Yes.
So I have all this information. So what am I going to do with it?
Yeah.
How am I going to apply that? And you know, I think the two go sort of very much hand in hand. But sometimes I guess that one aspect of this is self-discipline. So I get all these prompts, I get all these thoughts, I get all this information. What am I going to do with it?
Yeah.
And do I want to do anything with it? You know, you look at social media today with Instagram and Facebook and all these things, and people spend hours just flipping, you know, from one image to the next. You see it particularly in kids, but also in adults. And I think partly perhaps what defines an adult is the ability to say, I stop now. Because this is not actually my priority.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's a very fascinating topic. We could talk for a long time on it. You also talk a lot about psychological safety. I've recently done a trip through Europe and Americas delivering a leadership program, and I developed the program myself. So included in that program was a topic on psychological safety. I was extremely surprised how many people had no idea what that term was or meant. Is that your experience at all, or are you finding people more understanding?
I think for you and I, Wayne, it's quite easy to get sort of sucked into the communities that we dwell in, where conversations can be quite sophisticated. But if I look at an organization, somebody who's, you know, running a department or in the C-suite, they have their things that they're doing, and for a lot of leaders, the whole concept of what they call, with great disdain, soft skills,
Yes.
uh, is just a pain. It's just something we have to spend money on, and I don't want to do that.
Mm.
Whereas actually, some of these things are supremely important. But unless they've been in that environment, it's perhaps not reasonable to expect that they have heard of some of these terms.
Mm.
So I think it's quite possible to judge some of these people, and actually, it's not fair. They've
Oh,
just
for
got their
sure.
own focus points.
Yeah.
I remember working with some patent attorneys in New York a few years ago, and what an extraordinary group of people they were. Patent attorneys have a doctorate, a PhD in two totally different areas. One is law, and the other one is a kind of science.
Mhm.
So these are people who, I mean, their whole life is full with the expertise they've got. So if you started talking to them about psychological safety, they, I'm quite sure, would look at you and say, "Well, what planet do you come from?" It's just not in my thought process.
Yeah, no, that's fair comment. That's fair comment. I'm probably am skewed. I have a good friend who's a co-author of a book called Psychological Safety Playbook, and I find it a great book. And I don't know if you've ever seen it, but if not, then I'll send you the link.
Mm.
When you're working with clients, I mean, do you introduce the concept, and if so, like on a very simplistic level, are there any immediate practical steps that our listeners, who are predominantly leaders, could take away and put into place from a psychological safety perspective?
I'm sure. I think the first question is, do I do I think that I'm getting unbiased and honest input from my team, each
Mm-hmm.
person?
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't just make the judgment myself. I'd ask around,
Right.
because if you're not getting the full spectrum, if you like, of communication from each person in your team, there isn't psychological safety.
Mm-hmm.
And without psychological safety, you have low levels of trust.
Right.
And trust is the fundamental sort of baseline for the good functioning of a team.
Mm.
So I'd check that out. And because I would be bringing my own biases on this, I would get input from other people.
Yeah.
Not least the team itself. You could say, well, do people feel safe to express themselves here?
Mm.
Now, of course, they may say, yeah, we feel fine, but they don't, because you're not actually. It takes a brave person to say, well, actually, no, I don't think you are getting the best from us.
Exactly.
But that's where you want to get to, because when you begin to have that honest communication, then you're getting somewhere.
Mm.
You need the honesty that leads to something real, something authentic.
Yeah. It's one of the things that we talk about a lot in our programs is, don't expect that you introduce this one day and it's done. It's there. This is something that takes time. You're going to have to continually work at and with this concept to really bring it to life, to your point. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yes.
What about the
But
topics around? Oh, sorry, Tom, go
no, sorry. Well, I was just going to say, psychological safety is incredibly important.
on.
And if a team feels that they can be themselves and they feel safe in that way when they're together,
Yeah.
that team will outperform the others. It will.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen that myself. I've witnessed it. I couldn't agree more. What about a couple of topics that sort of run in parallel to psychological safety, and they are topical, as you mentioned a couple already, diversity and inclusion. The broader topic, I guess, is social responsibility, and then tagged on to diversity and inclusion, we now have equity or equality and belonging. Where do they fit for you within this whole psychological space, if you like, and trying to bring them to bear in an organization?
Yeah, I think inclusion is super important. And when I'm helping an organization change its culture, I will talk about inclusion, because if people feel included, then the likelihood that you're going to have a diverse group is greater. And where you have diversity, you're going to have more creativity. You're going to have more creative conflict, which you really need.
Yep.
Because you're getting different input from different people from different backgrounds. So that's really, really important, I think. And is without that lot, equity, you can forget, really.
Yeah.
So that's that sort of on that side. And the corporate social responsibility, I think that's I think it's just down to those dynamics. If you have a leader that's encouraging that level of trust and safety, then the conversations that might come out and say, "Hey, boss, let's spend an afternoon next month and go to the local school and give our services, doing whatever it is, digging a trench or painting a wall. I don't know, whatever. I think that organizations today really need to be challenging themselves, particularly in terms of what is their footprint on this earth. In other words, are they here just to make money, or is there something deeper and more meaningful that the organization is involved in doing? And if that's the case, what is that? I think young people coming into organizations today are much more concerned and interested in the purpose of the organization. And interviews tend, not all around the world, clearly, but in a lot of places, to be much more two-way. So it's not just about, oh, well, we've got 10 people to interview and we're going to make the choice. There's also, well, those 10 people are much more likely today to say, well, are you the employer that I want to work with rather than work for? And so there's this mindset, and I think a lot of leaders, particularly older ones, are finding that whole concept of challenge really quite difficult to deal with. But it's actually very healthy.
Oh, yes.
Organizations need to be thinking about their footprint. They need to be thinking about what effect they're doing their business is having, and also if they're producing products or whatever, what effect the products are having. You look at microplastics now. They're finding microplastics in pretty much every human being on the planet. Well, that's and nobody knows what the effect of that is going to be yet. But you could say that plastics firms really need to be exploring that and doing their thing rather than burying their heads in the sand and looking at, well, how do we mitigate this? How do we reduce this? Because we have a social responsibility, not just a responsibility to shareholders to make money.
Mm. It's a huge topic, of course, right? And the whole ESG movement with the social responsibilities in the middle there. Unfortunately, my own experiences, I see it still, for the most part, lip service and people satisfying the legislative need rather than actually taking that responsibility you're talking about. And, you know, stepping up to the plate, so to speak, and say, this is who we want to be as a company, not just the largest profit maker that we can be, type of thing. So I have to ask you the next question, Tom, which is about this this thing I uncovered when I was doing some. Well, I should say, first of all, one of the things I enjoy about being a podcast host is the research, and the reason is I get to learn so much as I'm looking at each guest. Invariably, I come across something that I didn't know about. And in your case, happily, I experienced several of those moments. So thank you for that. So the first one, of course, that I've already mentioned and failed miserably at pronouncing was, and you'll have to guide me again, equine
Guided.
guided experiential learning. So please enlighten the listeners as well as myself. What is this all about?
Well, of course, it comes from the Latin equus for a horse.
Mm.
And I came across this work quite a long time ago when I was studying family and organizational constellations.
Mm.
And I found that there was this guy in Holland that was using a horse rather than human beings as representatives. And so I went out and found out all about it. And then when I was in the States shortly afterwards, there was a client of mine who said, "Hey, look, we want you to facilitate our offsite, but we want to do something different."
Mm.
And so I said, "I have the very thing." And so I did some research and found, of course, in America, the horses are ubiquitous. So I found this pair, one a therapist and the other a a kind of horse whisperer, really.
Right.
And so I said, "Well, look, can you work with this team?" And they said, "Yeah, sure." So we ran this afternoon exercise, which was really drawing out how the team was communicating internally. The thing about horses is that you can't lie to them.
Okay.
Horses are incredibly sensitive beings. And if they detect the inauthenticity of a liar or someone who's holding back from communicating something that clearly is needed, the horse feels that dissonance. So if you ask it very nicely to just go walk, even just round and round in a round pen, it won't do it. It won't do it. It's just something just as simple as getting it to walk around. It won't. So the horse in that sense is a kind of barometer for the quality of the team.
Mm.
And that can be extended in all sorts of ways. When you try and get a team to get a horse to do something very simple, like just trot over a little bar. Unless they're working as a team, it won't happen. So actually, and by the way, it's jolly difficult to do. But if the horse is cooperating, the chances are that team actually is a very good team. So it teaches you about some of the unseen or the unspoken aspects of the dynamics of an individual or group.
Mm.
And you can also try it out, I suppose, for those that understand the science of dowsing. It's a little bit like the same. You can ask a pendulum a question. I think for some of the people who, your listeners, they'll have encountered this when you get water diviners who, on the whole, are extraordinarily accurate. And nobody wants to understand really how it all works, but it does. And if you try out with a horse, say a new plan as the CEO of a program, and we did this. I remember doing this in Denver. The CEO had a new plan, very proud of it. She was too. And she explained it to the horse. And the horse was completely uninterested, totally uninterested. And then she turned around to us and said, "It looks like I've got to go back to the drawing board and think this through." And the horse completely perked up. It was amazing. So they are barometers. They are amazing beings. They have a huge heart and heartbeat that just helps them be really, really sensitive. So yeah, beautiful, amazing animals.
That's really fascinating. In some regards, ties into another area that I observed when looking at what you do, and that is systemic constellations. Now, I'm a coach. I also use this method. But what I found interesting is not many other people that I know, at least, adopt systemic constellations as part of their coaching toolkit. And I think it's an extremely powerful technique as well, and really eye-opening for the individual that is involved in the exploration. How are you using that? Just briefly, like how do you apply that within your own coaching world or with your clients?
Well, you'll know that one of the challenges of constellations is the logistics of the people that you need in order to make it work. And getting people from within an organization to produce the people doesn't really work very well. Can, but it's not very good. So what I tend to do is to get groups to constellate things. Like, for instance, I remember having an offsite in Paris, and the head of EMEA was trying to understand the dynamics of what was going on across all the different countries that he was responsible for. And I just got people to stand relative to each other and how they were communicating, which is a kind of constellation. It's not the conventional sort, but just using that, it highlighted a number of things very quickly where one department was feeling left out. And there were a group of people that actually the work they were doing was being particularly despised by another group. And that actually wouldn't have come out otherwise. But it was a really good indicator for work to be done. So it's a bit of a hybrid, but that's certainly one example of how I've done it.
Yeah, as you explained there, I think it can be so powerful. So I have a hybrid version of it myself. So I have a board, and we have the wooden figures, and the client moves the figure relative to the rest of the team, so to speak. But when you can have the real people in the group, it's much more dynamic. It's I guess akin to doing in-person training and virtual training
in a
to
way.
a large extent. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've got a million questions, and I know we're always pressed for time. I'd love to get into cross-cultural challenges and just understand a little bit about your thoughts. One of the things that I see in the world today is that we have such a globalized workforce, particularly for the larger organizations. And there seems to be a huge gap with the cross-cultural intelligence of a lot of leaders. Now, I know you've worked with organizations in many parts of the world, so I was curious how you see that. I have my own thoughts, but I'd love to hear how you see that situation.
You know, there's the old story of if you give a person a hammer, everything will look like a nail.
Yep.
And I think that for leaders who haven't been internationally socialized, they do have this challenge quite often of judging everybody
Mm.
by the limited experience they've got of human beings. And the fact is that, and you must know this better than most, I guess, because of your time in the Far East in China and so on. People are very different, and their cultures are very different.
Yes.
And I think that what is incredibly important is to honor that,
Mm.
so that you're bringing a level of curiosity rather than judgment to any interaction with someone from a different culture.
Mm.
And as I've already said, you know, when I talked about meeting you in the corridor and not liking you because you wear glasses, we do have all these beliefs and
Yeah. Yeah.
and limiting ideas, which actually cripple our ability to get the best out of people from all different backgrounds.
Mm.
Um, and you know, we go back to self-awareness. The whole sort of idea about um, uh, really understanding what the conditioning that we bring. It's like you can only see somebody through the lenses of your conditioning experience, and that act can be incredibly limiting. And so finding ways to drop that and to, as I said, be curious, learn about other people, learn about other different cultures, and then not to apply that learning indiscriminately.
Mm.
Because you know, you in the West, you think about the Japanese, and Japanese are always bowing, and they're all doing this, that, and the way they deal with a problem. You know, some of that might be true,
Mm.
but it's not always true. And so again, it just being open, opening ourselves to difference. That's the thing, because we are naturally hardwired to be scared of difference,
Yes.
because we come from a tribal background. And so and that's what, you know, you hear people talking in organizations, tribes. It's great in one way and it's very damaging in another.
Mm.
So as the French would say, vive la différence.
Which means
Long live the difference.
long live the difference.
Let's honor that, and be excited because somebody is different, rather than saying, oh dear, that person's different, therefore I can't or won't engage with them.
Mm. Oh, I think we have a long way to go in that regard. So, but it does lead me into the next area that I know you're also involved in, which is conflict mediation. And
Mm.
you know, this misunderstanding or the biases we carry with us often lead us down that path of then having conflict with these people. And you spoke about risk, uh, becoming more risk adverse and understanding. And I'm wondering about, is there any key pointers that you would talk with your clients about that our listeners could benefit by when it comes to a situation when you're in conflict? How do we, or how can we go about minimizing the damage that we're potentially going to create? Is there anything that you normally advise people to do as a starting point?
The first thing is to breathe.
Mm.
I think when people are in conflict, and if you monitor their breathing, it's very tight, and it's very high in the chest. So all the oxygen that needs to get down to the parts of us where some common sense might reside, that isn't happening. So actually just taking a moment to breathe is a very good start.
Again, it's being self-aware enough in that moment and being able to do that is the challenge for many. All right.
Mm.
The blood has a tendency to boil very quickly. The emotions
Yeah.
drive a lot of reactions, yeah, or a lot of actions.
And we live in a world where there are so many examples, dreadful examples of how to relate. You only need to look at Gaza and what's going on there. You don't need to look any further than that, in a sense.
Oh yeah.
So um, I think that the next thing, I've said it before, is encouraging curiosity.
Mm.
If you can get people to be curious about the other side, what's making them say this? What's making them dig their heels in?
Mm.
And if you can do it to get people to just cross the room and be the other party,
Yeah.
that can be enormously powerful.
Yes.
Because what we tend to do when we're angry and defensive is we close down the ability to be empathetic to the other side.
Mm.
So I think those are good start points. Everybody's right in a way,
Yeah.
and they won't see it that way. They'll think they're right and everybody else is wrong. But it's so much easier when you've got to a stage where, like for instance, if you and I are fighting, right, and the facilitator says, right, Tom, listen to Wayne. So Wayne, you explain your situation and where you're coming from. Right, Tom, now you give that back to him. You relate to him what he has just said.
Mm.
And it gives people that time, that pause, where they have to think not from their own point of view, but from the others.
Yeah.
And very often that's enough to break the dam.
Mm. Very
So
true.
yeah, there's a lot of
Very
little
true.
things like that.
We often introduce the Thomas-Kilmann model to help people understand what their own style is. And then we have another tool that we use for managing conflict, which is the IBR approach, that interest-based relational approach. Not sure if you've seen that one, but that's very similar, step one, to what you just mentioned there. So very good. There's a couple of things you mentioned the first time we connected. And I just want to go back to those because they really stuck with me. They resonated for some reason. The first was you said, voicing things often brings clarity. And as a facilitator, as an educator, of course, couldn't agree more, right? But I'm just wondering, is there an example that comes to mind where you've actually seen yourself voicing something, and as a result of talking about it, you've become clearer yourself? Is there any, I know I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here, but is there anything that you could share with us that could sort of illustrate the point behind that statement?
Hmm. Um, you know, I'm trying to get there. You know, from a coaching point of view, I think one of the great powers of a coach is just to ask the right questions. If you ask great questions, then the individual, by speaking about this issue, can often get much, much clearer.
Yeah.
And the coach isn't doing anything more than asking great questions.
Mm.
So I think, you know, from my point of view, you know, I've got a coach, and I talk things through, and I'm struggling to find a good example. Just
No, it's okay.
um,
Well, I didn't mean to put you on the spot with the question, but I like the comment very much because I also resonate with that, and you know, even reflecting somehow then when I can talk about what I've reflected on helps me to get to that point. So I can imagine. The other thing that you did mention, and I had to go away and think about it in more detail. So you really got me thinking about it. But we were talking about the current world dynamic and how it's being spurred on by different events like climate change, war, pandemics. And you said it's creating people movement as well as polarization. When we really need unity. Uh,
absolutely.
and I thought about that for a few days, and I thought, gosh, that's so insightful. What's the background to what you're meaning by that statement?
Well, the problems that the world is facing are the big ones are global.
Hmm.
You know, I was I was thinking about birds and animals movement. You know, if you look at birds that fly halfway across the world, that they're not interested in boundaries between countries.
Hmm.
And the same with, it's like when you build a motorway, and now some enlightened countries create bridges which are specifically for animals to cross. So instead of getting decimated on the road, they can go, because for them this line of a road is an arbitrary
Yes.
obstacle. And they're finding that actually with this wall that they've built down between Mexico and America.
Hmm.
There's all these animals that would normally be crossing, and they can't.
Yep.
So we have all these arbitrary lines drawn on the ground, and it's enabled people to sort of keep their individuality, and at the same time, it's been an excuse for millions of people to be killed. And the the problem now, if you just take climate change for instance, that's not being more or less in one country or another.
Mm.
It's affecting the whole globe in different ways. And what we need, therefore, are people from, regardless of where they come from, their country, but to come together and say, how can we as a global population deal with this? And in order to do that, you've then got to start looking at the finances of all these things, because everything is generated, is motivated by money. And you can go to your grave covered in gold or dollar bills or whatever, but it's not going to change anything. So if we really want to create a world which is inhabitable for our children and their children, then we have to get together. We have to hold hands to deal with this. And the time in order to do that is getting very, very, very short indeed now, because things in the world, like climate, change over a period of time.
Right.
And when you set a dynamic in train, it isn't going to be stopped just by one particular act or other.
Mm.
And another aspect of this is, as things get more developed, and let's be clear, people say save the planet. The planet's fine. It's whether the planet is supporting an environment which is suited to us as human beings, because we are actually very intolerant. The level of temperature and so on that we can live in is really quite small.
Mm.
And so where the climate change is really having an effect, you're going to get just let's take rising waters. I can't remember what the percentage of major cities around the world are that are very susceptible to flooding.
Mm-hmm.
But that's, I mean, all that's going to do is to start making enormous numbers of the world move. And you've got all these countries at the moment who are saying, we can't deal with immigration, we can't have more people coming in here. And then they do hideous things to people who are trying to escape their nightmare to get to a place which is safer.
Mm.
And they ain't seen nothing yet. The levels of human movement that are going to take place in the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, we've never seen anything like it.
Mm.
And so unless we act as grown-ups, that's going to lead to a lot of war and a lot of killing.
Mm.
So let's start practicing being grown-ups.
I don't like finishing on dire notes, but I think that's a very sound warning for everybody listening. What advice would you give to an aspiring leader? Let's say they're just beginning their journey. Maybe focus on conscious leadership and how to deal with change within their organization. Any pieces of advice you would offer them?
Well, I think that the greatest gift that one human being can give to another is their full presence.
Mm.
So if you're a young leader and you're responsible for some people, just practice that one. It's so obvious when you're on the phone and you're doing something as well as talking to, it's obvious.
Mm.
If you're doing an email or you're deleting one, or it's obvious. So stop it.
Yeah.
Put down your phone, close off the screen of the PC or whatever, and just be with that person. Because the amount of time that you need will be much less, and you will hear them, and they will feel that they are heard. And when people feel like they are heard, they will do all sorts of amazingly positive things.
Very, very sound advice. Thank you, Tom. Where can people connect with you if they would like to learn more about what you're doing or they'd like to follow you?
Well, thank you, Wayne. We have the website, which is serenityinleadership.com.
Mm-hmm.
Please visit it. There's stacks of blogs and links to videos, and there's all sorts of resources there.
Mm-hmm.
We have this leadership program going, and that's part of the, it's an online program, not totally suited to people in where you are, in that we tend to run it sort of the early evening in the UK, which makes it a little bit late
A little bit late, but yeah.
But we've got people from the US through to Africa on the program now, which is exciting because the people are so different and they bring such different ideas, and that's what I love. So we can learn from each other. We have a YouTube channel. It's if you search for Serenity in Leadership, or you look for Leading Responsibly with Integrity and Purpose. That's the title of the series on there. We're on Instagram, we're on Twitter or X, and a bit on Facebook. But I guess the biggest is LinkedIn. Look me up, link up with me, give me your comments, tell me what you like, tell me what you didn't like in what I've been saying. I'd love to learn. So that would be amazing. Thank you, Wayne.
Yeah, look, great discussion, Tom, and wonderful to catch up. I know I delayed the session for a number of weeks, but great to have the opportunity, and thank you for sharing, so many insights. I'm sure the listeners got a lot out of it. So we'll put the links, as we always do, in the show notes, and yeah, hopefully our listeners will connect with you, and there may be some interest. Maybe we'll have to talk about bringing the program to Asia.
Well, I'd love to do that. Because I did work with an oil drilling company, and as they moved around, some people splintered off. So I've got some contacts in Singapore, and I'm over in Australia a fair amount because my son lives in Perth. So I'd love to come over more to that part of the world. That would be great.
There you go. All right, Tom. Well, thank you very much for being a wonderful guest on the ET project, and we'll keep in contact and catch up next time.
Brilliant, Wayne. Good luck yourself. Thank you.
So what are you waiting for? Hit the subscribe button below and click on the bell icon so I can pop up in your feed occasionally with a great tip for your ultimate growth.